Good afternoon. Before I open up the hearing on the last bill publicly noticed for municipal and county government, I do have quite a few pink cards. So in order to be able to fit everybody in here today by 5 p.m., I'm going to need to impose a 5-minute limit for testimony, then followed by questions and answers. The vice chair will indicate, he will have to keep track of the time, and he will indicate that you are nearing your time limit by holding up a pink card. And I would also like to explain that if a speaker has written testimony, to please indicate that and to pass it to Representative Walker for distribution around the committee table. And additionally, if after the 5-minute time, if you in fact do have more information that you would like to share with the committee, then please indicate that, and then please follow up with written communication to the committee via email. And finally, as a reminder, when you take the seat to provide testimony, please state for the record your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill. So you're all set. At this time, the chair will open up the public hearing on House Bill 501 FN relative to allowing towns to decline 5G towers. The chair would like to recognize Representative Diane Kelly, the prime sponsor of this bill. Good afternoon and welcome to municipal and county government.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Did you all, or did some of you at least, receive the email last night? I sent photos regarding the 5G towers that are part of the discussion. The first one is in front of the Bedford PD. It's big, huge, tall, scary-looking thing. And
Representative Kelly, could you pull the mic closer because I'm having trouble hearing you? Yeah. Okay.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, the tower in front of the Bedford Police Department is a rather large one, and then the newer ones, which are considerably smaller and harder to see at the top of utility poles. Anyway, I am Representative Diane Kelly from Hillsborough District 32, and I'm here today to introduce HB501, a critical piece of legislation that empowers local communities to make informed decisions about wireless infrastructure within their own borders. This bill builds upon the findings of the New Hampshire State Commission to study the environmental and health effects of evolving 5G technology, which is also known as the 5G Commission. The Commission found that the insurance industry looks on microwave radiation from cell towers as a hazardous pollutant and will not ordinarily even insure damages caused by ionizing or non-ionizing microwave radiation. The Commission further found that microwave radiation levels are not even being measured or documented by DES, DHHS, or any other state agency. Furthermore, the Commission reported that while many studies have indicated that microwave radiation has biological and environmental effects on humans, protective standards for New Hampshire flora and fauna don't exist and deserve much greater consideration and study. For these reasons, I believe that RSA 12K must be amended so that the state takes a more neutral position on the rollout of 5G in New Hampshire. As the law currently exists, city governments face significant legal pressure if they try to deny a cell tower, and they're unable to even address objections from residents and business owners around wireless infrastructure. If the state of New Hampshire refuses to implement the findings of the 5G Commission and has failed to regulate or track radiation pollution levels, then the state should leave the decision of when or where to site a cell tower up to the individual cities and towns. As we navigate the rapidly evolving landscape of wireless technology, it's imperative that we balance progress with prudence. This bill is not about halting technological advancement, but rather it's about ensuring that the people of this state have a voice in shaping the landscape of their own communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Kelly, for that bill introduction. Are you willing to take questions?
I am, however, following me will be the one of the directors of the Foundation for Bioethics, and she's considerably more expert at these things and would probably do a much better job.
Okay. Questions for the prime sponsor? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, the chair calls Mr. Jeremy Crandall. Good afternoon and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Crandall. I am here today on behalf of CTIA. We are the Wireless Industry Trade Association. I am speaking in opposition to House Bill 501. As background, CTIA members include such companies as American Tower, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and U.S. Cellular, all of which serve customers here in New Hampshire or have wireless infrastructure deployments in the state. In discussing this issue with you before you today, I want to start with two key items because right now we are seeing two things. Number one, unprecedented demand from consumers for more wireless services. And the rate at which that growth is happening is happening at exponential rates. Number two, a desire for improved connectivity in all communities in this state. Now, our members are working hard to respond to both of those items I just mentioned, investing $30 billion in 2023 alone in private resources to upgrade and expand the nation's networks, including here in New Hampshire. But I want to speak specific to this bill, because where that investment goes that I just mentioned and how those resources are invested depends more than anything on predictability, especially for our members who design and plan their infrastructure investments 18 to 24 months in advance. Speaking specifically for New Hampshire, for the last 2 decades, you all have had in place wireless siting policies that fit within the framework that I just talked about. They provide a very clear level of predictability, and they set very clear rules of the road in terms of wireless permitting for both providers and local governments. Very important piece as well. And in no uncertain terms, House Bill 501 would essentially eliminate almost all of those rules. The bill effectively deletes a broad swath of current state law governing wireless permitting, and it would replace it with what are vague, unclear, and likely unlawful language. I want to be a little specific about what I'm talking about here. The bill deletes, these are two examples. The bill deletes a requirement that, quote, carriers should minimize the visual impact of a wireless facility. The bill also deletes a mandate that state law not encroach on, quote, a municipality's zoning and building code enforcement powers. Those are just two examples, and I'm happy to share some others in the Q&A. Finally, it is highly likely that the bill runs afoul of federal law as well. The Federal Communications Act and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they are both especially clear, rules from the FCC, are especially clear that states and localities cannot pass laws that would effectively prohibit terms of wireless service. And in practice, that is what this bill does. And so for these reasons, we would urge a no vote on House Bill 501. And I will just add, Madam Chair, I did submit written testimony as well.
Thank you, Mr. Crandall. So with regards to submission of written testimony, do you have copies?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Ms. Susie has that. Thank you for passing that out. And you're willing to take questions?
Absolutely.
Yes. Questions for Mr. Crandall. Representative Dolan has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Question is, do you have any independent evidence of these towers impacting residents' health concerns?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So speaking to health concerns and health effects, I want to really emphasize what I'm about to share. It is the consensus of both the U.S. and international scientific community that there are no known adverse health effects as a result of the level of radio frequency energy emitted by wireless infrastructure, cell phones, and wireless equipment. The FCC has examined and actively examines this issue in terms of regulation of our infrastructure. The Food and Drug Administration, the World Health Organization, the NIH National Cancer Institute have all found through their studies over the last decade, or approximately over the last decade, that there are no known adverse health effects as it relates to this issue. And so we at CTIA have and will continue to trust and rely on the expert opinion of those organizations that I just mentioned. I will also share that CTIA, we have a website, www.wirelesshealthfacts.org, that expands extensively upon what I just said and provides a significant amount of background information related to those items, Representative.
Further questions? Representative Fracht is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Crandall, for your testimony. Help me understand, is there any sort of a difference in terms of either intensity or the way that the microwaves propagate between 5G and 4G or 10G that I can buy from Comcast, whatever that is?
Thank you for the question, Representative. So first and foremost, I want to emphasize for you all, I'm not a scientist. I will also add that a following witness is going to focus more on the science related to this issue. But Representative, I do, specific to your question, do need to point back to what I just shared a minute ago, that this issue, and it's an important one, has been looked at by a range of organizations that focus on these items specifically and have come to that conclusion that there are no known adverse health effects.
Additional questions? Representative Majori is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for taking my question. I'm trying to reconcile in my mind line 17 of the bill, Roman 5, which says municipalities may enact rules and regulations to enforce the provisions of this section, provided that regulations are consistent with state and federal law. So doesn't that bring us, I'm wondering if that line brings us right back to where we were to begin with, and therefore why even have this bill?
I would agree with you, Representative, in terms of our opposition to this bill. But if you don't mind, can I expand a little bit upon that? Yes. So New Hampshire's citing statute is approximately 7 pages. I have it right here in this binder. It is extensive in terms of what it lays out in terms of requirements on us as providers, but also very clear and consistent range of items in terms of responsibilities that local governments can take and impose on us as providers when we want to deploy our equipment. I want to share 2 examples of very important pieces that would be deleted by this bill. Each carrier or its appointed agent doing business or seeking to do business in this state shall comply with all applicable state and municipal land use regulation laws. That will be deleted if this bill were to pass. And then one other item, any person prior to constructing a new tower in any location where no approval is required, but is visible from any other New Hampshire municipality within 20 miles, shall provide written notification of such planned construction to other municipalities within that 20-mile range. Those are 2 examples of items that are in those 7 pages of New Hampshire law right now that would be removed and boiled down to a much smaller package, if you will, that is House Bill 501.
Yes, follow up?
Thank you. So if I understand you correctly, then still would have to comply with state and federal law, but local control would, for all intent and purpose, be completely eliminated.
So I'm not a lawyer, so I'll defer to, I want to be careful in answering the last part of your question there. In my opinion, here's what I want to put a fine point on my testimony in answering your question. There is nothing in New Hampshire law right now that, and I want to be very clear in how I'm referring to this, there's nothing in state law right now that prevents a locality from denying a permit for a wireless tower or other equipment, provided that those requirements meet the legal standards. Sorry, let me rephrase that. There's nothing to stop a local government from denying a permit based on the legal standards that they set out in their local ordinance. Now, that local ordinance does need to also comply with state state rules, state regulations, and state laws, federal laws and regulations. But that is no different than any other sector or any other industry that is regulated at the local, the state, and federal level. And so right now in current law, that power exists for local government, and that is why we would strongly urge against making such a substantial change that 501 would do.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Next, the chair calls Mr. Joe Torelli. Good afternoon and welcome back to Municipal and County Government.
It's been quite a day, a man of many hats. My name is Joe Torelli. I'm in Hampton, New Hampshire, and I am not an expert in this, but I did manage to get synchronous video and audio from 72 countries back to 30 Rock when I worked for NBC News. So I have a little bit of understanding of RF and satellite dishes and microwaves. I also live in Hampton, and we just had, over the last 2 years, a battle with Vertex about putting an oversized tower very close to a runway, our runway in Hampton. And so I actually took it upon myself to go out and navigate. And Representative Fracht asked a little bit a while ago about doing a PowerPoint. And I did PowerPoints for the Board of Selectmen that pretty much showed what the alternative is. And what Vertex was saying, I'll hold it up, no viable alternative. I don't know if the camera can see that. So that was the plan that they had and presented to the selectmen. No viable alternative to the zoning board and to the selectmen. Well, I disagree. We have things that are called canisters made by Galtronics that can be limited to LTE, which is 6 gigs and below, versus 5G, which is 30 gigs up to 300 gigs of microwave high frequency. When you go higher frequency, you have shorter distance. When you have lower frequency, you have longer distance. So these canisters, I will do the little animation here and go through it. Transmit, receive, and hand off. It's LTE, lower power, provisioned with specific signal pattern. So patterns can be omnidirectional, cardioid, and ribbon. Okay, so figure 8. So this is the one that's near the tennis court going up from Atlantic Avenue as you're working your way around, I guess it's Church Street. Example of ribbon cable, Willow Avenue it's called in Northampton. So that's one of them. So that one's in a ribbon cable. So this is the bottom of the Galtronics connector. It tells you what the frequencies are that you're plugging in the fiber or whatever it is to do that. And this one is on Atlantic Avenue and Mill Road. I live on Woodland. So Woodland goes straight up. Once I get up to the pond, I have uninterrupted service all the way into Rye because we have several of these. We have 8 of these in our area. And I'm going to skip over to the to my map because I did radians, I did radius, I did all kinds of stuff. So let's scroll up here and I will show you the map. And this doesn't look as good as it would if this was full screen, but that's effectively northern Hampton into southern Northampton. And that's where all of these canisters are mounted at the top of the utility pole. Okay, so I'm showing a 25 quarter mile radius with the little blue marks. And there's not a lot of overlap. It's LTE, longer distance. You provision it with LTE, you boost the power a little bit, and you go to a half a mile. And I don't know if you can see this, but the red crosses over pretty much all of the area. So these have been installed. AT&T is the one that I am pretty sure has done it. I can watch the signal strength go up on my regular phone, watch it drop off as I get closer to the range limitation, and then it picks up again, which is what it's supposed to do, and that's what handoffs do. So I don't want towers. I think 5G is pretty much old already as we get into technology and things are starting to move a little bit faster with what Comcast is doing with their little cylinders that are hanging between the utility poles that are effectively neighborhood Wi-Fi is what they called it in 2013 when they started doing that. So when you drive around, you're going to see like a cylinder hanging from the utility wire, the cable, and a bunch of cables goes in on one side. That's effectively a big Wi-Fi. So I'm going to wrap it up. And I said 4 minutes. I'm at 4:15.
Thank you, Mr. Torelli.
Thank you.
Questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, the chair recognizes Mr. Andrew Thatcher. Good afternoon, sir, and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Andrew Thatcher, and I'm here at the request of CTIA, and I am also in opposition to the bill. I just submitted written testimony, but I'd actually like to jump straight to his question and comment and just kind of work through a little bit better exactly what 5G is so we all understand the playing field we're talking about. So fifth generation evolution, what we're talking about, as opposed to 2G, 4G, or 3G, what have you, covers a number of different frequency bands. 600 megahertz, 800, 2.5 gigahertz, 3.5 gigahertz, 5.5 gigahertz are the lion's share of what 5G is. That's what's being deployed just about everywhere. And those frequencies, as far as biologically, are no different than the 4G and 3G or UHF for that we've used in TV, et cetera. So those frequencies have been around a very, very long time. And fundamentally, biophysically, they're no different than everything that we're used to. So at least in the state of New Hampshire, I think a lot of the concern with 5G, people immediately jump to a higher frequency, the millimeter waves, which can be, at least in use in the US, can be 24, 28 gigahertz, 37, 39 gigahertz. There's some higher frequency bands that are being developed, but they're not in use yet. So 37 gigahertz is about as high as we get. Most of the concern really seems to be about these millimeter waves, the higher frequencies of which usually are only used in high density population districts like Boston or New York or something like that is where you're going to see those. There's a possibility in New Hampshire, I would say, so I would never rule it out, but maybe in a big university, you might want a little bit of that in the campus because you've just got too many people. But by and large, most of that, as the gentleman before me had mentioned, is handled by the small cells that's typically done. And they do use 5G, but it could be, for AT&T, it's going to be like 3.5 gigahertz. I mean, Wi-Fi networks, even in my own house, use 2.4 and 5.5 gigahertz. So these are not frequencies that we're not unfamiliar with. Going to the 5G millimeter wave, just talking about the physics for that, those antennas are amazingly tiny. So you may have an antenna panel that's about this big, and it could have 128 antennas on there that are all about that big. They put out about 1/10 of a watt, so diminishingly small energy, only because, as opposed to a traditional antenna, which is just broadcasting uniformly, you get one if you're in use and you're using a phone, that antenna would be directed toward you and you only. So if there was someone right next to you, okay, they might get an exposure, but it's exceedingly small. But if any further distance away, you're not getting any exposure at all. So from someone who does measurements and does analysis for a living from all of the antennas, be it rooftops or what have you, the 5G millimeter wave contribution is diminishingly small. So we've got very little power from those millimeter waves. The attenuation, because the frequency is so high, it actually doesn't penetrate the outer layer of the skin. That's it. So we're worried about, or people are worried about, gosh, I'm worried about adverse health effects. And I will admit, there's not a ton of information or science on studies on the higher millimeter waves. There's quite a bit, but not as much as what we have for everything else. But from a physics standpoint, there really is no reason for us to think that there could be a mechanism for which harm could happen, because we're limited to the skin and the eyes for those. And the basis of the standards is limiting tissue heating. And the heating over the last 70 years is the only known mechanism of harm. It's just pure energy. Where and how you modulate a 5G or 4G signal or something really doesn't matter to the cellular level because it's just pure physics. It's just pure energy. So as opposed to jumping further into it, I just was kind of trying to lay out the groundwork for what 5G, why millimeter waves. I mean, they're new, but I mean, in the big picture in the 70s, I can remember that microwave ovens, holy cow, we're putting cancer boxes in our kitchens. And no one believes that anymore. In the 90s and early 2000s, I was RF expert for the state of Washington for 20 years. The big concern, of course, was these could cause cancer. But as a physicist, that was pretty easy to find out. But we have a tremendous amount of information to now show that, of course, it doesn't cause cancer. And we have the human studies to back that up. And I'm done, I guess. So I'll open up for questions. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Thatcher. Questions for the speaker? Oh, Representative Frocht has a question. Raise your hand higher, not just a finger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thatcher, my question may be a little out of your area of expertise, but I'm intrigued what the previous speaker, Mr. Torelli, informed us about these cans on utility poles as an alternative to towers. Now, in my town, a couple of years ago, we permitted a tower for, it was either 3 or 4 different carriers. My question is, do these cans have the ability to carry signals for multiple carriers, or are they limited to single carriers?
That's a great question. Typically, and I work for a lot of utilities for implementation of these, because you can imagine they're on light poles or power poles or what have you. By a general rule, most utilities limit 1 carrier per pole. So if you want to do small cells, is what they're called, in a different neighborhood, pick a different pole. So typically speaking, you're only going to have, and if there's 1 antenna or 1 canister, that can only be 1 carrier because they're broadcasting out on their allowed channels. So you'd have to have another antenna and there would be a little bit of separation. But generally speaking, for small cells, it's 1 for 1 because there's plenty of lights or there's plenty of power poles. You can go somewhere else. So does that answer?
It does. I have a follow-up.
Follow-up,
if Madam
yes.
Chair will allow.
Yes, I'll allow.
Can you compare the cost of a rural deployment of service in a hypothetical, let's say 10-mile square area using a single tower versus these cans? Which is more cost effective?
I'm definitely not the cost person, but basically it comes down to efficiency. If you have 1 tower for this large area, there's only so many callers it can handle, so much data it can handle. So they end up having to deploy more areas locally in order to cover, to make sure we get the coverage. As Jeremy mentioned, the use is going up quite a bit. So typically that's what's going on. And as far as exposures go, I mean, I've been doing surveys since the 90s, and the background, radio frequency background, basically really hasn't changed since the 80s or 90s. It basically stays the same. As we get more densification, the power levels and overall background tends to go down because they can't broadcast that further than just the area they're trying to cover. Otherwise, they lose efficiencies in the design.
Further questions? Representative Dolan has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. My question is into your expertise of physics / electronics. Oftentimes, communities get a tower and the fire department says, hey, can I put my antenna on the tower? and then the police department says, "Oh, I want to put one up too," and then you've got different technologies probably at different frequencies. Can you comment on any stacking of frequencies or
Right.
or
I do a lot of that work actually for the utilities, fire departments, et cetera. So I'm very familiar. In fact, I've got 2 on my desk doing projects, towers that include everybody. Typically, the fire department, police stations, et cetera, are using more like a 400 megahertz or 500 megahertz. That's typically a frequency you're going to use if we're using, like you say, push to talk or handheld walkie-talkie or something like that. That's typically common. All of the antennas, I don't care who makes them, are required to go through FCC verification and validation. And that is to make sure that if this is your bandwidth, 10 to 15 megahertz or whatever it is, you don't exceed that. You don't spill over into something else. So yes, they can all, I do towers where there's 8 or 10 different sites on it if it's big enough. And they'll have a lot of different carriers and a lot of different uses. Typically speaking, those fire departments or the police and radio, et cetera, don't have a lot of, the duty cycle's much smaller, meaning you're not having constant transmission, you're having individual intermittent, so it tends to not be 100% transmission. So, you bet.
Further questions? I had a quick question. So
Yes.
with regards to the 5G millimeter wavelengths, you, in your testimony, stated that there's no evidence that it causes heating of the skin. And,
I don't think I said
oh,
that.
no.
I said that's the basis of the standard is the tissue heating. So
Okay.
as long as we're less than the limits, we won't cause that tissue heating. So
Okay, so what I was trying to understand, so I misunderstood what you had said, but what I was trying to understand is, do we know if there's any evidence that that there's at the cellular level with regards to bonds, like for example, DNA, RNA, can the electromagnetic energy affect those bonds at that very small cellular level of
thank you
of
for that question. I probably meant to mention that, and that here in front of you, I forget. So ultraviolet light, about 10 electron volts, is the minimum energy necessary to cause DNA strand breakage or damage. Everybody knows about skin cancer, et cetera, really what's going on in a DNA strand. Following an exposure, you can get a stickiness, and you could have a thing called like a thymine dimer where 2 strands would stick together, and if you're trying to replicate, well, you could have a misreplication. So that's really the minimum energy by which this genetic damage that you speak of could happen. These millimeter wave, we're about 100,000 times less than that. So I don't care how much power you're using, you're not going to cause genetic damage. What you could do, especially if it's a millimeter wave and it were high enough intensity, you could get an erythema, a skin reddening, right? Your skin got hot or something because of an intense exposure. But again, we're nowhere near the proximity, and I do a lot of rooftop work, so that's predominantly where I am. But you're just, as long as we're less than those standards, we're not going to even get an erythema because that would be a really high exposure, to be honest with you. But even then, move your hand away, back away for a few minutes, and your blood flow and radiative heat loss will dissipate that energy. Does
Thank
that
you.
help?
Yes, it did. Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Next, the chair recognizes Miss Brittany DiBernardo. Good afternoon and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the Municipal and County Government Committee. My name is Brittany DiBernardo and I'm a resident of Franklin, New Hampshire. And I would like to talk about the harms of the 5G in our community. The New Hampshire 5G report that was funded by New Hampshire tax dollars nearly 5 years ago was a breaking document, and I support HB 501 because I believe for the sake of New Hampshire's public health and environment, we need to revisit that document and execute its recommendations. Currently, under RSA 12-K10 IV, it states that an authority may not mandate, require, or regulate the installation, location, or use of personal wireless service facilities. This term is outlined in RSA 12K and includes both standalone 5G towers as well as those placed on utility poles. This is a massive oversight and encourages the telecom industry to install these personal wireless service facilities on utility poles where there is no permit or public discourse required prior to their placement. It is imperative that authority is restored to municipal governments and to the people of New Hampshire, whether to accept the risks outlined in the 5G report or stand up and decline personal wireless services facilities in our communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. D. Bernardo. Are you willing to take questions?
At this time, I have someone with me, Josie, who is much
Okay.
better at answering those questions.
Okay, thank you. So next, the chair recognizes Mr. Rick Fabrizio. Good afternoon and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Good afternoon as well, Chair Power, Vice Chair McDonald, and members of the committee. Thank you for letting me speak today. I am Rick Fabrizio, Senior Director of Advocacy and Public Affairs for the Business and Industry Association. We are New Hampshire's statewide chamber of commerce and leading nonpartisan business advocate. BIA opposes House Bill 501, and we led efforts to defeat flawed bills the last 3 years that sought to unreasonably restrict wireless telecommunications in New Hampshire because it's critical to residents, businesses, first responders, and the state economy. Allowing municipalities to decline 5G towers would increase the risk of running afoul of the Federal Telecommunications Act, specifically Section 704, in multiple areas. HB 501 would also repeal the New Hampshire law RSA 12K regarding personal wireless service facilities. This law promotes smaller alternatives to the taller cellular towers, and it's critical ensuring first responders are able to co-locate antennas on towers for wireless emergency communications. Municipalities already have significant ability to site personal wireless facilities and towers permitted by the Telecommunications Act. HB 501 even states that decisions to deny 5G wireless facilities shall be made in accordance with state and federal law and regulations. Now, HB 501 is also at odds with the state policy to facilitate the provision of broadband and advanced personal wireless services, and also to promote its access to residents, students, government agencies, and businesses, given the critical importance to the economy and everyday life nowadays. The constant in the opposition to the bills the last now 4 years has been the allegations that 5G causes health effects. As has been pointed out, electromagnetic radio frequency waves are non-ionizing, meaning they don't have the energy to damage DNA or cause direct tissue damage. I have included in my written testimony a long list of state and health agencies that do not support allegations of causation of health effects by 5G and other telecommunications, wireless telecommunications. In conclusion, we ask the committee to find HB 501 inexpedient to legislate, and I'm happy to take any questions and try to answer them for you.
Thank you, Mr. Fabrizio. Are there questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, the chair calls Ms. Josie Kumandala. Good afternoon and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you for having me and hearing my testimony. My name is Josie Kumandala, and I live in Dover, New Hampshire. My interest in this bill is derived from my experience with the city of Manchester, where I lived for the past 2 years. Last year, I contacted Manchester's zoning, health, and planning departments about a small wireless communications facility installed near my home in a public right-of-way. The city denied having any knowledge of the tower because they do not regulate or even keep track of the locations of any antenna employed in the public right-of-way. I believe Representative Kelly provided a photo of a small one. This is the one near my home on Woodbury Street in New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire. And the reason that the city told me that they couldn't track or even document or do anything about these facilities is RSA 12K. The law, as it's currently written, states that carriers wishing to build personal wireless service facilities in New Hampshire should consider commercially available alternative PWSFs, that's personal wireless service facility, over tall cell towers. And further down in 12K10 section 4, it also says that notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this chapter, an authority may not mandate, require, or regulate the installation, location, or use of PWSFs on utility poles. So that is why I'm here. This is the aggravation that I've personally dealt with in dealing with my city's zoning officials. So I'm here to tell you that whether a wireless facility is on a utility pole or it's 60 feet in the air, it's still emitting microwave radiation, and they should be regulated in the same way. 12K is trying to address the aesthetic objections, the view impairments that tall cell towers represent. And I understand that many residents in small towns don't like seeing cell towers in their vistas. But my personal objection has to do with the fact, which is detailed in the 5G report, that non-ionizing radiation is an uninsurable pollutant, and the entire insurance industry is hedging against 5G. This was all detailed in the 5G report in 2020. And since that time, the FCC has been sued under Environmental Health Trust versus FCC in 2021. And the federal judge declared that the FCC's standards were capricious and arbitrary in terms of their exposure guidelines for microwave radiation. So for these reasons, and because the New Hampshire State Legislature has already established a 5G commission, and their investigation concluded that there is sufficient evidence of biological and environmental effects from these antennae, that this legislature should remove or amend their laws, and they have not done that since the establishment of the 5G commission. Now, if the state does not wish to be active on the topic of microwave radiation regulation, then they should leave the matter to local constituents and health and planning boards. That's my position. This bill does not in any way overrule federal policy or take away anyone's right to access services or for providers to meet the demand for services. There are already ample cell towers throughout the state. Nashua and Manchester are headlong in the deployment of these small wireless facilities. But unlike residents of smaller towns who might have an objection to a cell tower in their view, if you are a resident of a place like Manchester or Nashua or Hampton, where the small wireless towers are being deployed, you have no means, either by planning board, selectmen, zoning, health department, none of those regulatory bodies can address your issues, even though the state has admitted that the harms and hazards exist in the 5G report. So for that reason, I'm asking the committee to review the 5G report and to begin to implement some of its recommendations, of which HB501 is a good start. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you willing to take questions?
I am.
Questions for the speaker? Oh, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, the chair recognizes Mr. Henry Veilleux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Crandall, Thatcher, and Fabrizio covered a lot of things I was going to say, so I will just submit the written testimony in the interest of time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next, the chair recognizes Mr. Eric Power. Good afternoon and welcome back to Municipal and County Government.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Municipal and County Government Committee. For the record, my name is Eric Power. I'm from Brookline, representing myself and in favor of House Bill 501. As I mentioned previously, I serve on the planning board in Brookline, been serving on it since 2021, going into my 5th year. I also am a electrical engineer. I have a background in RF, a background in electronic warfare for over 3 decades. I have a bachelor's degree from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in electrical engineering, and also a master's degree in electrical engineering from Northeastern University. I am a senior member of the Institute for Electronics and Electrical Engineers, the IEEE. So I've had a lot of experience with RF, and it's definitely something that you have to consider that we don't know all the answers right now. 5G, by its nature, if you go back to physics, the very path loss formula for physics shows that the path loss, that means how much the signal attenuates, is an inversely proportional to the square of the frequency. So the higher you go in frequency, at the square of that, you're going down in power. So if you need to keep communications and you're going up higher in frequency, what do you think you have to do with the power? You have to go up a lot to actually establish that. Now, some modulation and some coding can definitely take care of that. And, but, you know, the proliferation of these without, and putting my planning board hat back on, being able not to be able to say or have anything to do with these personal wireless facilities being put in on right of ways, I think is wrong. The 5G Commission talked about that. RSA 12K lets you do that now. And I think that this bill is a good bill to help bring that local control back. We have a lot of money and a lot of business interest here. I'm not here for that. I'm here for the residents of my town and the residents of the state to do the right thing and make sure that we have local control and that we understand what's going on. Right now, we do not have the millimeter wave 5G deployed here much in New Hampshire, but that is going to be coming if you don't take action. And we do not know what's going to happen. For those that aren't aware, microwave ovens run at 2.4 gigahertz. That's where you cook your food. So, you know, keep that in mind. It has higher power levels, but we use microwaves to cook food, and you know what it does to food. It heats it up and it cooks it, right? So the other thing I'd like to mention is there's going to be a tendency to go to these higher carriers, because at higher carriers you have higher bandwidth, and at higher bandwidth you have more capacity. So the market is going to drive the adoption of these higher gigahertz level, 30 gigahertz and above standards. And they're not here yet, but we have a chance to do things the right way with having local control. And if this bill was to pass, in my role on the planning board, I would be able to use my technical knowledge along with the local control that we have to make intelligent decisions on these wireless facilities before it's too late and they proliferate everywhere. You've heard from prior speakers that it's already starting to roll out in Manchester and in Nashville and maybe in some other urban areas. This is the time to pull back the reins on this a little bit and to pass House Bill 501 in order to make reasonable control. And if you look at paragraphs 4 and 5 of the bill, it says we cannot do anything that violates state or federal regulation. So we're not going to be able to do anything we can't do by federal law. So we're going to be bound by that. So I think it has the safeguards that we need, and I hope that you find it ought to pass. Thank you very much. I'll take questions.
Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you. Well, the last pink card that I have is the Honorable Jason Gerhardt. Good afternoon and welcome to municipal and county government.
Good afternoon. Thank you, committee. I don't want to be disrespectful, but the honorable title thing, I just shy away from it. It gets kind of weird to me. So, but I do thank you for that. And I'm here today to speak about a bill that I think is very important. I brought a bill last year to implement the recommendations from the 5G Commission that was instituted in 2020 that we already mentioned. But a lot of time and energy has gone into this issue. New Hampshire was the first state, and if you look up 5G effects and dangers and so forth online, that comes up everywhere. And I do believe that New Hampshire, again, has to take the lead and start really addressing an issue that we haven't looked at since 1996. So let me explain. Now, I just want to set the scene here. 1996, Independence Day was a movie in the theaters. Twister, really garbage movie. But among also the, what do we have? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought with that. Twister was such a bad movie. But the FCC has not changed their wireless radiation human exposure limits since 1996, despite a court case, the 2021 U.S. Court of Appeals for District of Columbia judgment in Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC found that the FCC's refusal to update its 1996 limits to be, quote, arbitrary and capricious, end quote, because it ignored the science on children's vulnerability, on long-term exposure, on non-cancer impacts such as damage to memory and sperm, on environmental impacts, birds, bees, trees, etc., and the hundreds of testimonies submitted by people reporting injuries. Now, this is from an article from Environmental Health Trust, which is a great website, has a lot of good data, infographics. You can kind of just, for somebody like me with ADD, helps you kind of just, keep busy and find out what's going on. But this is also mentioning the Ohio lawmakers that wrote letters to the FCC saying, hey, we want to know what these new limits are. 1996 was a long time ago. I was 11 years old. A lot has changed. Cell phones were not nearly as ubiquitous as they are today, and a lot of other technology. Along with the governor of Wyoming in 2022, there's a ton of people that submitted letters to the FCC and so forth, but we haven't gotten anywhere. Now, hopefully with the new Make America Healthy Again movement, I'm hoping that does occur, but I think we also need to take that at the local level, and this is what this does. You're simply saying local entities do what you wish according to the wishes of your will of your constituents, who, to be quite honest with you, I think people in general know the truth better than certain people who are not able to devote as much time to this subject and other things. So for instance, the committee, you guys are tired, it's a long day, it's almost coming on 5 o'clock. How many people are really going to, do a little extra credit or homework tonight and look into this? And I don't blame you. I didn't do much myself. But I do know on ED&A that I served last term, every year, apparently every 2 years, the fire codes, Representative Dolan knows, the fire codes get updated, the building codes get updated. They were trying to push some new environmental, increasing the insulation on houses, drive up the cost further. But that stuff happens every other year. We have to do it. I still don't understand why we have to do it, because the fire marshal for the state admitted that there's no real proof that the fire code actually, there's no metric to show that it's saving lives or affecting anything. It's just something we do because everybody's doing it. So I would say that, since 1996, maybe this is something we should be doing at the state level. We did with the 5G Commission. So I'm encouraging you to support this legislation, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of what's going on. And I just want to let you know that I just happened to glance at my mailbox. Usually I throw away all this stuff, but from a former speaker, his organization put out the legislative report of 2024, and I just looked at it on the cover because it mentioned 5G bill killed again. But in that article, a little fluff piece. Anyway, various polls consistently show New Hampshire residents support mobile wireless upgrades in their community, including small cell antennas, which are essential for 5G deployment, right outside their bedroom windows. I didn't say that. But the point is, why do we have 100 people plus in support of this bill? And I believe it was like 15 to 20. Maybe you guys will mention that at the end. I don't think people are in support of this as much as the industry paid lobbyists are trying to tell us. And I think we have serious problems, and we need to look at it and trust people that the 5G Commission, just look at the report. 600 pages, but just look at the recommendations. A lot of effort went in, and I really think we should move on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerhard. Are there questions? Representative Elward is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Do you think average members of planning boards have the technical background, education, experience to regulate this industry?
I would argue that planning boards and everything in that realm of central planning reminds me of some kind of weird Stalin-esque dystopian nightmare. And I'm not really a big fan of that. What I'm disappointed in, just very off that, what I'm disappointed in is that the average person does not really have any way to stop, let's say, a small cell antenna outside their bedroom window in a city. So that's all I got to say.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. So that was the last pink card that we have. And Vice Chairman McDonald will report out the blue sheet. I think I'm a little tired.
Okay, in today's blue sheet, we have 1 for the bill and 5 against.
Thank you. And with that, the chair will close the public hearing on House Bill 501 FN. So that concludes our publicly noticed business for today. Before we adjourn, I have a few afternoon announcements. So the committee will meet on Monday, March 3rd for hearings and executive sessions that has been scheduled. Please plan for a House session to be held on Thursday, March 6th. Additionally, please hold open Monday, March 10th for executive sessions only. This date will become official once it's been scheduled and publicly noticed. Are there any questions? No? What? Third House session on Thursday, March 6th. Yeah. Okay, so Representative Franz.
Are we having hearings on Monday as well? I only have executive session.
So that's been scheduled and publicly noticed, and yes, there are hearings in the morning on the remaining bills that have been referred to this committee. And following that, after lunch, we will be holding executive sessions on several bills. So it's both. Yeah. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you and have a great weekend.